Okay, great. So welcome everybody. Thank you for joining the Everyone Know Someone panel for the Arlington Community Providers. This is in honor of Domestic Violence Awareness Month, which is in October. We're wearing purple, we're trying to represent some purple. And DVAM celebrated in October. We want to acknowledge and honor victims of domestic violence. We really want to elevate the voices of survivors. We want to spread awareness and knowledge to everyone around the issue and have them the opportunity to educate and provide some context and information. And most of all, what I like to stress is we really want to just promote healthy relationships and kind of network for wellness and network for change in the community to help people as much as possible. So this is a statistic that some people might be familiar with. It's 1 in 4 women and 1 in 7 men, excuse me, will experience physical violence from an intimate partner at some point in their lives. So taking a month to honor and utilize that space and time to speak about this issue, we find it really immensely important. So we really appreciate everyone coming out to do so. We'll take a second to introduce ourselves. My name is Caitlin Mitchell. I am a victim advocate at the Family Advocacy Program at Fort Myer for the Army base. That's how you look like the next.
Hey everyone, my name is Natalia Tyrell. I am a victim advocate on the Henderson Hall side of the Joint Base Fort Myer Henderson Hall for the Marine Corps for the Family Advocacy Program there.
Hi, I'm Scotty Young. I am the prevention specialist for Doorways in Arlington.
Hi, I'm Jan Elliott. I am with Ashiana, formerly Asha for Women. I'm the outreach director and
Dominique Poirier, the Director of Legal Services with Just Neighbors Immigration Legal Services.
Hi everyone, I'm Kalila Elamine. I'm the Child Protective Services Supervisor with Arlington County Child and Family Services.
Good afternoon, Alicia Polka with Arlington County Police Department. I'm a police lieutenant. Currently, I supervise community outreach, and I have had supervisory experience with our special victims unit as well.
Thank you, everyone. So before we get started with the questions, we're just gonna kind of contextualize some common terms we might be using and that are oftentimes mentioned during Domestic Violence Awareness Month. So the first is DV. We hear the acronym DV all the time. I'm going to be using the definition provided by the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence, and they describe domestic violence as a willful intimidation, physical assault, battery, sexual assault, and/or other abusive behavior as part of a systematic pattern of power and control perpetrated by one intimate partner to another, to their partner. It includes physical violence. It can include sexual violence, psychological violence, emotional abuse. The frequency and severity of it can vary dramatically, but the one constant component is one partner's consistent efforts to maintain power and control in that relationship. Would you like to talk about IPV?
Yeah, so there's also the term IPV, which stands for Intimate Partner Violence. And the difference between that and DV is that it's a romantic relationship with another individual that's not necessarily a marital relationship.
I'll mention survivor and victim. So what I want to say is survivor is a term for an individual who's being targeted in that relationship where abuse is present. Victim is also referred to that person who's victim, and survivor was used as ways to refer to someone who's experiencing the violence in the relationship. As a victim advocate, I always give the power of the client that I'm working with and whoever I'm speaking with, the power to decide how they want to talk about it. And that can also change and fluctuate between victim and saying, I was a victim of this, versus if they do come to me and they say, I'm a survivor, I'm surviving this. So both are interchangeable, and we will probably be using them interchangeably in the conversation. But I just have to introduce to say that sometimes I kind of give them that opportunity to tell me what they're most comfortable with.
And in terms of the person who causes someone to be victimized, there's multiple terms that are used interchangeably as well. Some of those are abuser, person who's caused harm, batterer, perpetrator, or offender.
We'll mention pronouns. Those are ways in which people identify their gender and how they want to be referred to. It also can be used as a way of kind of signaling support for gender diverse and inclusive inclusive organizations, providers, support from people in the community.
And so with that, I think we have a good basis with understanding the terms that we'll be using today. I think we could go off and start off with our first question. So whoever would like to start, in supporting victims and survivors, we know that there could be barriers to accessing services. What barriers have all of you guys seen in working with victims, and how do you try to address those?
I'm here representing Ashiana. So we serve South Asians coming from 7 countries in South Asia and in the DC metro area. So for us, the biggest barrier has been the culture. Just understanding the culture, just letting the survivors, the victims, and the first responders know. Second is the language. Again, just talking about it, there are about 600 odd living languages in the 7 countries in South Asia. We don't speak all of them, but we are able to understand most of it. And then just the fear of being an immigrant, you don't know where your visa is, your status, whether you could be sent home, your husband could lose his job, your children could be taken away. So those are the main barriers we find trying to get the clients out of where they are from this situation.
The way that I kind of like to frame it is the 3 C's: culturally competent capacity. So it's not just hiring more, social workers or counselors. We have to, obviously be competent, but they also need to be culturally competent, and that includes not just understanding culture, but speaking the language. And so, if you want to increase access to services, you have to remember those 3 C's.
And I would say that echo the language and culture also. It's both for us internal and external, because we have a lot of young officers and young supervisors. And so when I started this in 1997, we've come a long way, much, much better, much more robust, much more connected with the community and services, but when people think about accessing the police for services, they think someone's gonna get locked up. I might get in trouble with, as far as immigration. The officers don't speak a lot of the languages. And so for us, the barriers, are those, but the external stuff, we talk about like how the community sees domestic violence, right? And unfortunately, there's no middle ground sometimes. It's either an acute situation that's happening, or it's something that people are suffering with that don't want to report. So there's nothing in the middle. So like people don't call us or call our communication center very often to say what services are there, like always, that can help someone that doesn't involve police. But when they think of an emergency response or a response to an emergency situation, they think police. So we're dealing with that, but one of the reasons why I'm sitting here at the table is that we've also acknowledged that there are other partners in the community, but some of the similar challenges, maybe not unique to law enforcement. But that being said, we can kind of sort of try to overcome those barriers and get some information out on how to access the services.
And I want to piggyback on you, Lieutenant Pilko. Similar to law enforcement, when Child Protective Services is knocking on a family's door, some of those barriers are initially letting survivors understand, what our role is and how child abuse and domestic violence interface each other, as well as helping families realize that our purpose is not there to remove their child. Because I think that's the initial thought, like, oh my God, this awful thing happened to me, is occurring to me, as well as you're here to remove my child. And some of the barriers are also helping survivors understand that they're not at fault for their abuse, and helping systems to understand that, because oftentimes there are different systems that may say, well, you stayed, you did this, you did that, therefore you're ultimately responsible for that, and helping to navigate those systems and understanding that no one should ever be held accountable for their own victimization, as well as that our survivors have agency and being able to make decisions for themselves as well as their children that ultimately can keep them safe as well as their children. So I see that as a huge barrier, because when children get involved, there's many entities that want to be extremely paternalistic and just save the kids. instead of trying to help to support the families.
I think adding to that, kind of what you all are pointing out is a great example of how the systems themselves can sometimes be a barrier. Whether that be the survivors' lived experience of having experienced harm within those systems that are supposed to support them, or just the perceived harm that they have, a history of maybe negative experiences with police officers or CPS, or at the hospital, if we have a survivor who's trans, doesn't want to be misgendered or dead named, and they go to the hospital for support. So the systems themselves can be barriers, and I think it's important that we all help our fellow partners and organizations and our own organization to be educated about the intersectionality of identities and experiences that our survivors are facing, so that we can help them and acknowledge that it's not always a pleasant or that can be a very scary process to seek help.
Can I just jump on something you said about the fear of authority?
Mhm.
So it's not something they may have experienced, it's more a perception of what well-meaning friends and family tell them. And that can be a big barrier when we go in as an organization and try to tell them, no, you will get the help, we are there to hold you. So the fear is what, and the shame is what holds them back a lot. One of the most biggest barriers we find to get them to come out and talk.
And I would also say, just, as somebody who works exclusively with immigrant survivors, is that they are coming often from cultures where the police cannot be trusted at all. They are in cahoots with gangs or narco traffickers, or are just, generally corrupt, as well as other institutions, the court system, and so, and that's not just, that's many cultures around the world. And so, unfortunately, law enforcement and some other systems are having to push back against that, that lived experience, besides having to deal with the perception here in this country of what their family is saying to them. So I think that is a big barrier. It's just a big mistrust of organizations and law enforcement for some of these cultures.
I would add to that what to do after that initial step of getting help is sometimes a barrier, because it's like, okay, I told someone I was sexually assaulted or experienced domestic violence. Now what? Yeah, I left the hospital. What are they going to do? Who's going to help me after that? And so I think that something that we can do again is helping get our resources out there. And what we're doing right now is helping to let the community know that we're not just there on that first step, but on every step after, as long as you need us.
And we've come a long way. I mean, if you look at the typical response for domestic violence, whether it involves children or not, the fact that they can receive medical resources from the FACT unit, the fact that, we can refer to our doorways partners is, I think traditionally also, in a lot of our countries, my parents have been Peru, Guatemala, there is no follow sometimes, and that's the one thing inherent about police work is we go to where the fires are at, right? And a lot of times for the officers, when they come into the job, they don't realize, oh my gosh, there is a room full of people that are involved in helping this person. Our part is this big, but we have to do a better job, I think, sometimes informing the public and informing ourselves of what's out there, what the process is, because the simple go and arrest, it's much more complicated than that. And I say complicated because it's intricate. There's a lot of moving parts, and it's extremely intimidating to some folks that aren't aware of the system, and those that are aware of the system who have had bad experiences is another barrier, because those folks, we know that these situations aren't one and done, and sometimes the bad experiences also perpetuate and create those barriers, and sometimes it's internal without any ill intent, and sometimes it's systemic. The laws or processes that are put in place. So
I think you guys did a really good job of explaining. I think when, like generally when DV is mentioned or these relationships, hurtful, traumatic things happening in a relationship, the scariest part can sound like what's happening in a relationship. But I think you guys did a really good job of providing that, like, there are just as many scary bits that can happen when you try to get out of it too. And the follow-up and accessing, and from, not just from any fear of retaliation, but just like accessing the resources and feeling safe in those spaces and stuff like that. So I appreciate all you guys sharing that, so thank you. We're moving to question 2, and I wanted to ask you guys, what is your role in getting victims and survivors to the services that you provide, or to services, whether it be your own or maybe like widely in community, things like that?
So, okay.
Yeah.
So, I mean, from a first responder perspective, usually it comes to us first, and I have the unique perspective of working in our communication center as well. So I'm also trained as a dispatcher, and I work in our PCC, our call center. And we get a lot of calls that on the surface are not domestic, you would think, right? Somebody's tires were slashed, right? So, or we get a loud complaint and it's a couple arguing, or we get, something that happens at the shopping mall between a couple or intimate partners that's domestic related, that doesn't get categorized as that. So our role is when we get out there, listening, providing appropriate resources. Do they need a protective order? Do they need emergency housing? Do they feel safe, in that engagement with police? A lot of times they don't call, it's someone that observes the behavior. So for us that might be our, one and only opportunity to be able to say, hey, listen, if you don't feel well, here's a card with services. So for us, it's like sometimes we're that first person or on the phone, we can say, listen, we'll warn handoff, we'll call doorways, here you go. And so for us, it's like, we're sometimes that first agency, whether it's a violent act, most often it's not a violent act. And we know that the first violent act that we get called to is not the first violent act in that relationship. And so I think our role is just to be probably one of the more forward-facing agencies and getting folks, the basics, right? To say, hey, there are resources. It's not just calling the police, but if you need to, here you go.
As a first responder as well, at CPS, oftentimes we get calls from law enforcement, from schools, from hospitals, mostly mandated reporters, where a child, is making reports of concerns of what's going on in their home. But when we get involved, us working with survivors, where one, assessing and trying to find out a little bit more information regarding the nature of the relationship and what's going on in the home. And we're also providing a lot of psychoeducation and resources regarding how it may affect the child, because oftentimes we'll hear survivors not recognize, well, my child was in the other room, he or she didn't hear this, and they don't have to be present to know what's going on and to understand some of those issues of coercive control. So from there, beyond doing psychoeducation and doing assessments to find out what type of resources, we're also doing some safety planning and whatnot, and we often are calling our partners at Doorways to come in early to do some safety planning. Also, if a parent is not interested in speaking with Doorways, we're getting some consultation just to say, hey, we've talked about these different things in our own safety plan. Are there things that we may be missing? We also let them know if there are issues of imminent danger for themselves or their children where it may not be safe for them to remain in their home, options regarding our safe house with Doorways. And again, parents have agency over themselves and their children. And if families will want to remain in their home, we're doing, hey, are there neighbors? We're trying to link with support systems or whatnot in the event that that the perpetrator or the abuser comes back, usually most of our calls are coming from law enforcement and there's protective orders. So in that 72-hour EPO timeframe, they can't come to the home, which gives us a little bit of time to start doing more safety planning and linking with resources. But we'll be involved for at least 60 days.
I'll go next if we're moving down the line. So it's funny because Immigration Legal Services is like usually the last rung on the ladder for referrals, it's like once they get to Doorway Shelter, then Doorways calls us and refers. But, and that's unfortunate in a way, because if a victim has access to working legally and feeling safe about their immigration status, then they might have more agency to get out of an abusive situation. So it's kind of unfortunate that we're sort of an afterthought, if you will. But I kind of want to switch this question around because the pandemic has provided an incredible opportunity to reduce barriers to accesses, to services. And, you know, before the pandemic, we met with all of our clients in person. Many of them don't drive. Of course, you could not get a driver's license in Virginia if you were undocumented. And even if you were documented, it could be quite difficult to navigate the DMV. They didn't have, you know, understanding of how to get to our office. They had to take 3 buses to get to our office. It took 2 hours. Who's going to take care of the kids while they're doing this? Because good, you know, they don't want to bring the kids to a 2-hour appointment where they're talking about serious issues. Or maybe they've worked 2 jobs, and they're absolutely exhausted, and they cannot take time off of work 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, to come and talk to an attorney. So, you know, when the pandemic started, we pivoted to going completely virtual, which is not something you all can necessarily do as first responders. But it's provided this wonderful opportunity to give our clients flexibility in accessing our services. And what we've discovered is that the majority of our clients actually prefer to be virtual because they don't have to worry about childcare. They don't have to worry about taking 3 buses. They don't have to worry about necessarily taking time off from work, or at least taking less time off of work. So it's been a very interesting learning curve. But I think that to the extent that you can really think outside the box about how you can reduce barriers to accessing your services, I would never have thought about virtual consultations and follow-ups and so forth with clients, but it has really been a wonderful thing for our clients. And we plan on continuing with it, actually. Yeah. And they can actually like be at the shelter, and somebody, you know, a caseworker can set up the computer for them, and so they don't, you know, they don't have to go anywhere. And then the caseworker, if they're interpreting, can just be there and interpret with them. So it's been really, really great.
And you know, we applied some of that with our pop-up events during DVAM and going out to, like, we went to the Mega Mart. And, you know, same thing, when we want to do community engagement, get information out during the current climate, you know, and getting people to come to the police, that's challenging in itself. So we created, we've got a pickup truck, some chairs, tables, tents, go out wherever the folks are, you know. And so I think that goes to that point where, you know, a lot of the community doesn't feel trust in the police. So if we go out to the Mega Mart, which has embraced us and all our proactive stuff that we're trying to do, that's a first step. So.
Just to add to that, yeah, for us, the virtual has been, it's kind of a mixed bag. For the one reason with the pandemic, the perpetrators are in the home with them. So it's been hard to talk with our clients. And our clients are from the immigrant community, maybe documented, maybe undocumented, maybe having an H-4 visa, and the children are there, language is a problem. So that has been a real challenge to find a time to call them or for them to call us. So our helpline, it's not a hotline, it's a helpline, but we do get back within 1 business day. And we make sure we tell them that it is safe, because being from South Asia, it's a plus, but a double-edged sword, because again, the fear is there that we belong to the community. And the community with the very intricate family structure, there is a fear somebody is going to know, and they are going to be in more trouble. So we make sure that it's confidential. We tell them it's only 1 person taking your call. It's only 1 person going to be talking to you. We do not have volunteers who are manning it. After the helpline and the intake, we do a case management where we try and get the client to say the issues. The biggest challenge is the lack of knowledge of what DV is. We don't know. So it's so important to explain to them the words you're using is this. This is what it all encompasses. And then once we get that, we get the issues and look out for the emergency protocol of course first, that's most important. And then we work with the client, making sure the plan we develop for them is something that they can implement, that they want to. We only do options. We do not tell them do this, don't do that, because that's where we're trying to empower them. So that's what they're being told all their lives, do this, do this, do this, whether it's with their parents or with the new in-laws. And then we work with them to get them all the services they need. So the transportation is a big challenge. We drive them where they need to go. We get them lawyers, interpreters, because like I said, we have, I don't know how many languages, so we try and, it's hard for us, but we try and explain, yes, you can tell us what you want, and we will pass it on. So really in a nutshell, that's how we work, and the last part of where we work and we try to provide services, try to spread awareness about the culture, about the languages, which is so important, not just for our community, because there's such a big denial in the community of the existence of DV. Just because of the family structure, the patriarchal hierarchy, all those traditions that have been there forever. But even the other communities, the first responders, just to let them know this is the reason she's reacting this way is because of this, the culture, which we understand. And we have been building partnerships, the doorways with the county, with everybody who we can work with. So our clients get the best resources they can. And of course, then it's all fingers crossed and wait for things to happen.
Yeah, with doorways, our partnerships have been key in making sure that we are reaching victims and survivors at any stage of their process. Partnering with the different immigrant focused organizations or with the police, we have a legality assessment program with the police so that they have the training when they're in the field on these calls. They can talk to survivors and victims and say, you know, given the research, the data, someone in your position has and can end up dying. Because of that, I would like to refer you to doorways, you know, and right there in the field, connect them on the phone with us. We have a designated line for that. So we also have, as you all mentioned, our shelter, which is you know, really well known in the community, really well supported in the community, but it's a really small part of what we actually do. We have many other services. We have our mobile advocacy team, which does short and long-term case management work. So helping them get food stamps if they need, childcare for their kids, housing security. We also have our court advocates. Maybe we have survivors who are dealing with a custody situation or some sort of legal immigrant status situation. We have court advocates who can help them with that. So we have a wide array, in addition to our therapeutic services, our counselors that Revive. So we have a wide array of services that we offer to survivors and victims. And then my position in particular, I'm a prevention specialist. So it's my job to go out into the community and help people, especially young people, understand how to build relationships that are free from violence, that are free from abusive behaviors, that are really focused on healthy, pro-social, respectful, safe, and loving relationships. And so it's really not just about helping folks after they've experienced these things, but helping them think ahead and be proactive and help people have the relationships that we want them to have.
Thank you guys very much for sharing.
And so moving on, I'm going kind of back to question one. We talked about barriers, and a lot of you mentioned barriers that specific cultures face. Why do you think that there's barriers to marginalized and oppressed communities, and how do you try to overcome that and help them access services when it's so difficult?
Well, I mean, over the years, you try to develop. No, you try to develop a certain level of cultural competency. So, you know, when I first started, it was like cultural diversity, right? It was big. And then when you start realizing it's speaking the language is one thing, but understanding the culture is probably more important, I think, because, you know, I think we tended to usually to be a lot more siloed back in the day, and police did their thing, CPS did their thing, the medical profession did their thing with providing resources for victims and survivors of domestic violence or sexual assault. So I think for us, the barriers, you know, have been that, that, you know, we can hire as many police officers that have master's degrees and whatnot, but when you hire someone that is from Mongolia, someone that is from Bangladesh, someone that is from, that's a great start, right? When you understand the type of familial relationships and you understand what is motivating someone to stay in an abusive relationship. And even just saying that, like from my perspective, sounds like kind of naive because, you know, we know it's a lot more complex, but so for us, that's, you know, the thing that we're working on. I think these partnerships help. I think the SART training that protocol that we came up with, we're looking to create a big domestic violence protocol as well. So the more education, the more knowledge we bring to the officers, it's still going to be the barrier of what's out there about law enforcement, unfortunately. So we can't control that to a certain extent, right? But what we can control is when we are the ones causing that, particularly Arlington County Police. Why? What was it about that experience, or what was it about that situation? And obviously accountability for us, but also learning from it and getting the word out that, you know, okay, we made a mistake, you know, or we own it. So how do we move beyond that and get the information out? So, you know, it's inward facing as well for us.
Yeah, I think that there's also some gaps in some of the data and research, because I think it was mentioned earlier about how a lot of folks don't understand what intimate partner violence or domestic violence or sexual violence looks like. Maybe there are elements of that that are kind of integrated into their cultural experience anyways. And so they're now there's an educational component there that is sometimes missing, of like, when we say domestic violence, we mean this, you know, the way that you all did at the beginning of our conversation here. And so there's gaps because of that. There's gaps because it's normalized in some places. Some of those unhealthy behaviors that I'm trying to teach young people are not great, are just a normal part of our everyday culture. You know, I one of the examples I give in my workshop sometimes is like in media. You know, if I were to tell you there's a man, he lost custody of his kids, he is sabotaging his ex-wife's relationships, he's trying to manipulate his wife into seeing his children, we would all agree, like, that's really unhealthy, that's dangerous, all of these things. That's the plot of Mrs. Doubtfire, which is a really popular movie. One of, like, you know, an American comedy classic.
Yeah.
And so, you know, that kind of acknowledgement or understanding of what is dangerous and what is unhealthy and what is considered violence is murky for some of us. And so that also causes some gaps in our data and our research and how we can help people get the help that they need.
But I also think some of the gaps are survivors knowing what the long game is or the end result, because I'm almost sure anyone who is a victim of domestic violence wants the violence to stop. However, they don't want their partner to go to jail. They don't want their partner to be deported. They don't want their partner to fill in the blank of any other consequence it may be for these reports. So I think some of the gaps become, oh, everything is fine, it's okay. Also gaps in systems where I don't have any suggestions for how we change it, but the whole concept of prosecuting domestic assault and battery cases where I, who was victimized, now have to come to testify against my abuser, who also happens to be my husband, who after whatever sentence, he's coming back home. And we wonder why, people don't speak, or people aren't trying to be very forthcoming and honest in getting the help. So I think those are some serious things we need to look into, because even with CPS, even when people open it up and start talking, it's only to a certain extent, because there's also some guilt and some shame when talking about intimate partner violence and domestic violence, but there's also worry on, I'm scared to say, even if I did something that might be this minute, it may be looked in a negative light, and I may also be looked or charged differently for this. And I don't always have the magic wand or the answers for all of these questions, but those are dynamics that we all have to look in when working with families and individuals who are experiencing domestic violence.
Yeah, it's like the victim is re-victimized by reporting, right? Because now the only breadwinner in the family is in jail or deported, and there's no income coming in. So, I mean, I can't tell you the number of clients I've said that dropped charges because they just wanted the husband to come back home, so the income would start coming in. How else are they going to support their kids? But I also just wanted to say that domestic violence is a silent disease in a lot of ways. It's like cancer in that you don't necessarily notice all of the markers. And so it's easily overlooked. And I think that one of the best things that we can do as a community is to do a lot of work on the front end to build those relationships with people who might be victims, so that they feel more comfortable coming forward even before it gets to the need to call a first responder. And that can look very differently for different service providers. For the police, it's a lot of community policing and stuff like that, and just like being there as a trustworthy presence. Same with CPS, so I think that you have better outcomes if you do the hard work on the front end, but that means funding for that front end work, which the way that our systems are frequently set up is that we fund the emergency work and the back end work, but not the front end work, and that's unfortunate and rather short-sighted.
And it's interesting when you look at the data, and it's funny, everybody is data driven. And what's the measure of success? Healthy relationships, right? Respect for one another, no violence, physical violence, psychological, verbal. What's the measure? Because we're getting out in the community, we're getting the word out. But when you look at the bigger picture, right? Spending budgets, what is the measure? It's always been the classic, less crimes, right? That's one measure, but for me, it's a little bit more hard to measure, right? Sorry, lack of vocabulary sometimes. But so for me, really it is just the basic, okay, how do we best serve our community? Knowledge of resources, being out there, letting folks know, and a lot of the officers sometimes feel bad because they walk away from some of these situations. A lot of them feel bad because they know exactly what you're talking about. They see it in court. They see it when the person comes up for the domestic standby to get their stuff, right? Which they're allowed to by law, but at the same time, most of the officers know what's going on, with the intimidation, and they see it at court. And, it's like they build resiliency, the officers do. But, I think at the same time, with more knowledge about what's out in the community, and getting out into the community, that we can bridge some of those gaps. But data wise, I mean, for me, I look at it more so information about situations like I mentioned before that are not your acute, violent acts, that are your, you called us for something, right? Capturing that and saying, how does that lend itself towards what unfortunately becomes an act of violence, Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So for me, that would be like, could help us have more robust investigative services, more robust victim witness services. Could say, okay, we need to invest in these kind of services because we're seeing these kind of incidents that build up to that. So the lab is kind of sort of working its way towards that, but I'm more of like the finding, and we tried to work on this before with some data project piece about how do these other incidents that are not violent feeding into the violent acts and where is that connectivity, if that makes any sense. So that's where we're lacking, I think, in our
Yeah, I agree, and it's spreading awareness, not just with the people who are in the situation, but the whole communities. So we were in this high school talking to 11th and 12th graders about domestic violence, which was really heartening, and to see so many boys in the group, which was the best part of it. And after the whole thing, there was this young girl standing in a corner, and as I was walking out, she came and said, "Can I ask you a question?" She'd been quiet until then. And yeah, of course, and I took her to the side and she said, "If you are hit once, is that domestic violence?" Just broke my heart. I said, "Honey, once is once too many." And for her to have said it, it must have taken so much courage, a 16-year-old sitting there trying to say it. So like you said, awareness, it's not just teaching the service providers what the culture is, but the community.
Yeah.
And our communities have a major problem because the denial is so deep. We try to go to places of worship because that's where the congregation is. And it's so hard to break in because the people who run those say, "Oh, we take care of our work. There is no domestic violence here." And who are the ones running it? It's the main members. And the saddest part is no culture, no religion says domestic violence is allowed. And that's not an excuse, but it's kind of, I don't know, they just try to weave it around something to say, it's okay. One beating doesn't matter, it's to make her straight. Or we have a client who's got cameras put up in his house and he said, that is stalking. And what is his excuse? "Oh, I'm protecting my family and I'm not there." So it's so nebulous, like you said, it's not a hard track, basically, you are in the wrong. It's just spreads all over and it's awareness and partnerships and just talking. Talking with the pandemic, this is one place where we remove our masks and yell, "Don't do this, there is no social distancing, let's all get together and try and get it out of this, the human race."
But there has to be willingness on the part of the governments, both local, state, and federal, to fund that.
Yeah.
And instead of being short-sighted and just funding the hospital visits, the children missing school, all that stuff, which is the outcomes of this disease, but, it's like you fund mammograms for women so they don't get breast cancer.
Yeah.
Why can't we fund,
Yeah.
all the wraparound services and community policing and community engagement so that we can, stop the emergencies before they happen.
Yeah, prevention is always better than the cure.
Absolutely.
And I also say, I like the metaphor. I think when I was in college, which wasn't that when I was in undergrad, I was with the domestic violence services course, which actually brought me to this field in the first place, which was amazing. But I remember we were talking, and it's a metaphor that I know is used in a lot of scenarios, but my professor said the metaphor is like, if you were at the end of a river and you just see all these people flying on the river and you're like so exhausted pulling them out, but if you just go up and fix the hole in the ground that everyone's fallen in, which is the prevention side instead of the responsive side, then there wouldn't be anybody you have to catch at the end of the river. So I think that's kind of, I don't know if I articulated it that well, but it's kind of what you all are saying. It's like if you're engaging it on the side of like communication, education, prevention, I always like to say, I do it during troop trainings when we're given a training and it's not DV, this is what happens if you do it in the military. It's let's talk about what a healthy relationship is. And I was speaking to a sergeant the other day, and the idea is like, it's okay to have a conversation with a group or with someone and go, does it not feel good? Because if it doesn't feel good, you're validated and not feeling good. It's opening, I think, a lot of what you said, Scott, and I said it all too, this community conversation of let's talk about what doesn't feel good when you're with your partner and what does, and maybe ways to engage with them if it doesn't feel comfortable. Community can you engage with them to kind of assess maybe next steps of what to do. So we can like plug that hole in the ground towards the beginning of the river than try to catch everybody who's gets stuck in the water, you know?
Can I add just something, 'cause I know the question was more about marginalized, and oppressed communities, but, I think we would be remiss if we don't talk about how much DV and intimate partner violence is underreported in non-marginalized communities. Where maybe like, oh, this family may have a certain income level or certain status, they're fine, but we recognize that domestic violence happens across race and color, nationality, socioeconomic status. But I just wanted to just make that as a note that, you know, that even looking from a child welfare lens, there are certain communities where we don't get any calls. And I'm not going to believe that nothing bad happens in these communities. It's underreported, which also means that there are people who are being harmed, but for whatever reasons, no help is being sought or reports are being made.
And not to mention the LGBTQ folks in the queer community experience these issues in a very unique and different way, but still need the same services in terms of, you know, getting support with childcare or even an abusive partner, any of those things. It's just that it's important that we are educating ourselves in the different socioeconomic statuses, the different LGBTQ, sexual orientation, all of these things, because it's gonna look different, but everyone needs the same services. Absolutely.
Thank you, guys. And I also think that genuinely that leads really well to the final question I kind of have for everybody, which is, we talk about like, you know, we talk a lot about our roles, but we did mention a lot about the community. So what do you think community members, and this is kind of two opposite sides of two very important, both very, very important. What do you think community members can do to help victims and survivors to receive those services and things that they would need? But in the same respect, what do you think community members can do to support those who have harmed as well? Like, what is it, domestic violence is a terrible thing that's occurring, and the traumatic and scary things are happening in a relationship, but how can the community help and kind of reach both parts of that? So obviously stop it from happening and hopefully prevent it in the future and things like that.
So I would say it might sound kind of counterintuitive. I think somebody mentioned that it doesn't have calling the police, right? So, you know, we get calls for police services where it is a very minor thing, and I'm not talking about domestic violence. I'm talking about like it doesn't need a police response, and we sometimes get calls about folks that I know are going through a bad thing, but they're just kind of like, well, I have a friend, and you know, and so we're better equipped now to give those phone calls to doorways or other services that aren't the police. But I'm thinking in the community, what I would ask is if folks know that somebody's in a bad way, right, that they tell them that we're out here, right? And then so that's what we're trying to do with the pop-up events, to say, you don't have to call the police. And like I said, it sounds counterintuitive, but you know, it isn't an all or nothing kind of thing, right? Even though I know in some cases they should call the police because it's really violent and bad. But, you know, so for me, I would ask the community, just if you know someone that needs help, there are resources out there. If you need to call the police, fine, call our non-emergency number, but also, you know, through our website, well, we have links to pretty much every agency in here through Project Peace. So, you know, that would be my message, is that if you know someone that needs help, regardless of their situation, as far as immigration, regardless of their orientation, gender, economics, whatever, they can get help, you know, and it doesn't have to be the police, you know, and like I said, it's counterintuitive, but if they do choose to call the police, then it's not just me, it's everyone at this table. At some point will impact their situation. So, you know, and then the reason why I say that is because a lot of folks don't know, a lot of officers don't know that, you know, after they are done with that incident, what goes into it. I mean, I can tell you, her and I have sat in systems reviews, and at the end, we've had some really strong conversations, and at the end, I'm like, I mean, honestly, I you know, did not, and I felt really, I felt bad because, you know, I thought I was doing a good job, I locked somebody up, you know, and yeah.
Yeah.
And then, you know, when we had one particular case, she was saying, well, why didn't anyone call CPS? And we had a nice robust conversation. And at the end, I was like, honestly, I ran out of excuses. I was like, you're absolutely right. We would have benefited from calling CPS right away. Because it's not just the services for the child. These are folks that can look at the whole lethality of the situation and say, guys, yeah,
She needs somewhere to stay,
right,
kid needs some food,
right.
so on and so forth.
And in the particular situation, in some situations, you get the extended family. It now becomes the problem. And it was in this case.
Mhm.
So, you know, that's the other thing, the patrol officers, I don't expect them all to have this awareness. But that being said, I would ask the community just to have a little faith in the systems and, you know, if they know someone that needs help, call the non-emergency, that's fine. But look at our website as well. There are partners out there that don't require police notification that can help you.
And I want to add to that, it's also, you said the statistic, 1 in 4 women are survivors of domestic violence or intimate partner violence, which means we all know someone.
Yeah.
And which also means for anyone who's listening now, like as we're saying, we know someone, of the person of one, don't turn a blind eye.
Yeah.
And know that even if you don't have all the answers or know exactly what to do, know that there's support resources in the community to reach out to. Also, and don't just think of, oh, because I called 911, the end, and I did my part. I look back and I share with staff a story about how as a kid, there was this kid in our neighborhood who always come over for dinner. He would play with us and it would get dark, and when it's usually time for him to go home, he would always be there, and my parents never made a fuss. Like, he'd eat, and then later on, you know, my parents would take him home. He was a friend of the family, he wasn't a stranger. And then as I got older, I realized that his mother was getting abused by her father, by his father. And my parents knew, but their small part was, I'm doing something to keep this kid away from whatever's happening, whatever's seen. And it's something just that small to think about, where, you know, there's somebody who needs some help, someone needs a smile, some neighbor who just may need somewhere for their kids to go, or a wife just needs to go, and if you hear something, call the police or do whatever it is. So it's just remembering that it's not just the responsibility of those who are at the table, it's also in the community, because if the cops never get a call, if CPS never gets a call, what is that little thing that you can do individually to help a baby survivor or their child or the entire family?
Yeah, I mean, I just want to echo what a difference one person can make. And I, you know, in almost 20 years of doing this work, have heard testimony after testimony after testimony. And almost to a person, they were at some point encouraged and assisted by a friend, a colleague, a nurse, somebody who intervened because they cared. And so, you know, just want to echo that again, and what a difference it can make. But also want to zone out a little bit and look at the broader picture, because this whole system is one of responding to an emergency for the most part, and then retributive justice. And, you know, you talk about what is the end game? The end game is healthy relationships. This system doesn't necessarily speak to that. You know, it speaks to getting people out of violent circumstances and maybe empowering them, but it doesn't speak to educating the perpetrators so much, or offering different avenues to mitigate the situation besides, you know, removing the person or jail or deportation or whatever. And so I think there's a lot to be said for remodeling the system as one that's a rehabilitative system instead of a retributive system, so that you know, we want to teach abusers how to be good partners. And that's part of stopping the cycle, besides empowering the victim. And I know there are programs that exist out in the community to do that, but again, they're not funded very well, you know. So again, it's this short-sighted attitude on the part of the people who handle the purse strings. Like, we all know what would work, but it's hard to advocate to the people who are handling the budgets and the purse strings to fund that kind of stuff. That would really, I think, be a lot more impactful.
I just want to jump in really quickly about services to those that harm. Yes, there is need for more services and more resources. But I will say that the county has the Abuser Intervention Program, AIP. We often say those acronyms that focuses on healthy relationships, anger management, as well as providing that service to the person who harmed. Oftentimes, we're also assessing, and even though it may be the criminal justice or civil court processes or whatnot, with providing counseling services, sometimes substance abuse services, mental health, crisis management services for those who have harmed, as well as, and I don't want to sting gender bias, but sometimes it's the parenting, the fatherhood groups, because we often see a lot of our reports are the male or the father, but we do recognize that there are women who also may abuse. But having that ultimately leads to having better relationships as a partner, as a parent, as whomever. So they do exist, but I do believe that there's a larger need for more programs.
Just to jump in about the perpetrators, I just heard a beautiful statement early this morning. It says, don't call them out, call them in. Talk to them, teach them, because most of the time they're doing it because of, we say, generational. They've seen it happen, and it happens a lot in the South Asian community. We have had clients whose in-law, mother-in-law said, oh, it doesn't matter. He needs to let some stress out. So you do not sit down a couple of times. He's bringing in the bread and butter. He's taking care of the children. Or if the father-in-law abuses, he says, oh, it happened to me. My in-laws did it to me. So it's okay. You just continue doing it. So important that we teach our sons, the boys. It doesn't matter who you are. You need to respect. So we just need to call them in, teach them, explain to them, and we don't have to be sitting on a pulpit and doing it. We work with them.
And it shouldn't be tied to just the criminal justice system, which is where you see most of those programs, is after they've been arrested and they have criminal justice involvement. It should be, part of the wider community, whether it's in the high schools, at the DMV to get a license, maybe you have to do some kind of class. In the churches, in the mosques, in the synagogues, there's no shortage of places and venues to educate and interact and interface. And again, you've got to do the work on the front end to make it impactful at the back end.
Yeah, and it's really important also that we remember that it's not a hard binary, right? People who have caused harm, that's not all they did. They also often have experienced harm themselves. And so this binary of victims and perpetrators is false, and it kind of forces us to forces funding into certain areas and makes it difficult to provide the services that people need to get that education, to learn if we're only using this one lens to look at them through. And so I think that it's important as community members that we make sure that we're using the services that were mentioned before. Like, if we're gonna call someone, and maybe it's not an emergency for the police, you can call the Doorways hotline. It's not just for people experiencing violence, it's also for community members who are looking for, advice or resources for someone that they know, someone in their family, someone in their community, who can help direct them to services that can be helpful for them. Gonna say something else? But yeah, I think that for me as a prevention specialist, and I keep coming back to this because that is where we can make, I think, a big difference on the front end, working with young people, working with families and parents as well, people in parenting roles, to help get that idea around of what does healthy, loving relationships look like. And so how can we make it so not everyone knows someone in the future?
We don't want everyone to know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you guys. I think that was a really rewarding, informational, and it kind of allows some conversation to be had about, we all represent groups that want to help or do help, different variety of ways, victims or survivors of DV. But just, ways that we can grow, ways we can engage more. So I think this was a wonderful conversation. I'm very privileged to be a part of it. So thank you guys.
Thank you very much.
I know that we will have information with contact information up, so it's okay if no one wants that in a row for set phone numbers, but kind of or maybe to let everyone know the best way to reach us, all the organizations and stuff like that. With Family Advocacy Program, we do have a 24/7 hotline. Family Advocacy Program at Fort Myer is connected to work with individuals experiencing needs in the family, which can include the advocacy program, which I'm a part of, that in association with the military. But I always say, especially with being able to work with Project Peace, if anybody calls and they're not military associated, I love the opportunity that I can say, I have just neighbors, I have their contact information. I can't assist you directly, perhaps, but I can. It's like a warm referral. I'd be happy to connect you to the wonderful people as just neighbors, wonderful people at doorways, such and such, and that kind of connection. We also have a new parent support program, so military families who are expecting a first child or even another one, and so their family's growing, kind of assistance in that program. So we're really happy about that. And then we have prevention education training, since we talked about how important that is, and those range from how to be active listening and better relationships. That's a new one we just did. Anger management, stress management, which everyone experiences. So things like that. I know I'll have the infographic, but I can give the hotline. It's 24/7. Someone will always answer, and it's 703-919-1611. Oh, yeah, but you don't have to do the number, because I know that project is have a poster,
Oh, okay.
but just best way to contact.
Yes, yes,
stuff like that.
definitely, our hotline number will be up, under the video or the stream. And, you can also visit us at doorwaysva.org, excuse me. You can see all of our services there, including how to request a prevention workshop for your organization or community. Thank you.
Sorry, so I'm here representing Ashiana. We are, like I said, a 32-year-old organization in the DMV area. We serve South Asians from countries of Afghanistan, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Bhutan, Nepal, India, and Sri Lanka. We have a helpline and we do have a website. Please make use of it. It's ashiana.org. I'm sure they'll put it up on the screen for you, and do reach out to us. I know we serve South Asians, but we are happy to help anybody who has issues, and we will find you the right resources. Thank you.
Now, for Just Neighbors, you can either call our main number to get assistance or go online to justneighbors.org, get help. And there's actually an online form that you can fill out that's the same as if you call, and somebody will get back to you.
If you have any suspicions of child abuse or neglect, it doesn't have to necessarily just be regarding domestic violence, but any type of abuse or neglect, please call the CPS hotline. That number for the state and the local hotline will be provided at the end of the series.
And for us, obviously, if it's a critical emergency, 911. If you want to call and it's a non-emergency, if you have questions, you can call us. We contact you with different agencies depending on what the request is. That's 703-558-2222. And our website has pretty much, I think everyone here is linked through Project Peace. If you have any needs and services or just questions about folks you might be concerned about or information for yourselves. And if anyone out there has anything that we could do better, with regards to domestic violence and partner violence, just call our non-emergency or send us an email. through our website and just say, hey, this is what I see, this is, or if you're doing something in the community that you can be a part of, please reach out.
And if you're affiliated with the Marine Corps' active duty, or if you're a dependent or intimate partner of a Marine, you can call the victim hotline, which is 202-439-6038. You could also go to our website, which is mccs.org. Wait, it's mccshh.org.
Okay, once again, thank you everyone for coming in person, sitting at this table together and having the opportunity to kind of talk about this. And I think the idea is to motivate the community to not only know more, like the education, motivate them to create safe spaces for others to share. And ideally, like we keep saying, prevention side, but certainly help anybody out who would need it for any time in the future. So thank you guys so much.
Thank you.